It is a great privilege and pleasure to introduce you tonight to Dr. Craig Hazen, who is a professor of apologetics, Christian apologetics and philosophy at Biola University. He is the founder there of the Apologetics program, which is really all that we've tried to rip off of all of your good ideas here. The Biola Apologetics program is one of the top tier apologetics programs in the United States, and I don't think anybody does it better than Biola. And we're just so privileged to have Dr. Hazen. Dr. Hazen holds a doctorate from the University of California. He's an expert in a lot of things, comparative religion, Eastern philosophy. He's pretty well-rounded in a lot of those areas that a lot of evangelical Christians don't typically dip down into. And he's actually one of my favorite speakers here this week, and I'm very excited to introduce him. We do have a handout. You should have received a handout. If you did not receive a handout, we have gentlemen here who have a handout. Just raise your hand and say, "I need the blessing." All right, we've got blessings to hand out, and they'll be coming around to you. I also want you to know that Dr. Hazen has a table of merch down here. His novel, and he's one of the few speakers we've invited who's actually written a novel, a book that people would actually want to read. And Five Sacred Crossings, a novel, as well as some other CDs and DVDs from the Biola Apologetics program. And you'll just want to take an opportunity after the Q&A to go down and visit Dr. Hazen's table. But without any further ado, Dr. Hazen.
We can put it right up here. I'll talk into it. Testing 1, 2. Oh, is it this machine? Or is it this machine? Or is that machine? All right, here we go. Test 1, 2. All right, we'll use this bad boy. Well, this is fun. You must be exhausted. I looked at the schedule. These people are cruel. Oh my goodness. This is just a horrendous trudge you have to make through this. But I gotta tell you, there's nothing like this on the planet. There's no bigger feast of apologetics that I've ever seen. Oh my goodness. Don't let the word get out. This place will be full, It'd be tough to get a meal in the cafeteria, Well, my name's Craig. I'm from Biola University. It's great to be here. So glad to be with you. Quick commercial. I mean, Ryan already did a little bit of a plug. Yes, I wrote a book called 5 Sacred Crossings, and I've got this DVD on the table over there. This DVD is really the cool thing. It's a debate. It's a recording of a debate between one of our professors, William Lane Craig, who's probably, one of the smartest Christians on the planet. He's also one of the best debaters on the planet. And he goes up against Christopher Hitchens. Christopher Hitchens, in his day, he passed away a few years ago, so I assume that whole God question's been resolved for him. But he was the most famous atheist of the day, and clever and smart. And everybody was anticipating him one day debating William Lane Craig. Well, we set it up at Biola in our gymnasium. 3,000 people, standing room only. We overflowed into every venue on campus and then streamed it on the internet. Everybody was watching because this was a huge thing. High definition cameras were rolling, and we caught the whole thing. And you're wondering, how did it turn out? Here's how it turned out. In fact, you only need to read the atheist blogs the next day. The atheist blogs were saying things like, "Oh my goodness, what happened? Christopher Hitchens was spanked like an errant school child," So needless to say, I carry a box of these around in the trunk of my car to hand out to people at the golf course, the Little League game, the post office, my village atheist neighbors, I hand this to them. I go, hey, Christopher Hitchens debates some Christian dude, check it out, And then they go home and watch it, presumably, and I never see them again because they don't really want to talk about it. I suppose that's the only downside. So check those things out. Oh, in my novel, I'm an academic person, and I've written academic things. Yeah, nobody reads them. You sweat blood writing this phenomenal study of something that entranced you so in graduate school. And you get it published by a major university press, and you're so proud when the package comes and you open it, and there it is in all its glory. But you know what happens to books like that? Only a handful of research libraries might buy it, and then it's received by a research librarian who puts a sticker on it, marches it down to the deepest, darkest, and dankest part of the library, files it on the bottom shelf, and it's never seen by human eyes again. I said, phooey on that. I'm going to write a novel. People actually read those. And they do. I did this like 10 or 12 years ago, and they're still reading it. And I still get 2 or 3 emails a week by some skeptic or agnostic who was urged to read this, and they were completely intrigued by it. So it's fun to pack a whole bunch of ideas I'm really passionate about into a book like this and get it out there. And I say this as kind of an encouragement to some of you who, you're here at this Apologetics conference. God bless you. But you may have realized this may not be my main calling in life. It's an important calling, but it may not be my main calling. Maybe I have more of a creative bent, like in music or visual arts or stage plays or novels. I just want to encourage you, we actually need your services. And I'm so glad you're at a conference like this because you need some grist for the creative mill. And that's what you're getting here. So you'll be able to write a book like the Da Vinci Code. All right? The Da Vinci Code was a fast-paced mystery story with a bunch of hooey about Christianity packed into the middle of it. See, maybe you could write a fast-paced mystery story with a bunch of really cool stuff about Christianity plunked down in the middle of it that intrigues people and captures their imagination. So I gave it a try, and it worked pretty well for me, and I'm not any kind of pro in this business, but I really enjoy doing it. And so check those things out. Enough of the commercials. By the way, you look like a friendly bunch. Even though you're dog-tired, I know you look like a friendly bunch. I say it because, my colleagues out there and I, we go to secular university campuses quite a bit. And they're not particularly friendly there, I've been chased off a few campuses. Literally, I had to have campus safety escort me off for my own safety as people were getting all riled up. You can kind of imagine what might have happened in the Apostle Paul's day in some, Mediterranean town. It's crazy out there, but you look like a friendly bunch. I went to a college in Washington State a few years ago. Now, Washington State, some sociologists say, is the most unchurched state in the country. I'm not sure if they're right about that, but they've made that claim. And so, if you go into Washington State and ask a Washingtonian, what's the most unchurched city in the state of Washington? They immediately answer because they know what it is. That would be Olympia, which is the state capital. That's kind of a dark and gloomy place when you go there. And so if you go to a secular university campus in Olympia, Washington, presumably you have landed at spiritual rock bottom in America, right? So imagine my surprise when in my Biola University office in Los Angeles, California, I get a call from a campus in Olympia, Washington, a very secular campus. And it's a couple of guys. They've started a Christian club. I'm thinking, wow, how could they possibly started a Christian club on that campus? Well, it turned out it wasn't much of a club. It was these two guys. And they were business majors, so they discovered that if they start a club, they get access to Associated Students' money. So they're walking around with fistfuls of cash, wondering what to do with it. So their big idea is to invite Christian writers and speakers and intellects or whatever to come up to Olympia. And if nobody else shows up, these guys will fix some peanut butter sandwiches and they'll have lunch with the scholar, and then fly them back home. They thought it was worth a try. So I loved their experiment. I said, yeah, I'll be your first guinea pig. So they fly me from LA up to SeaTac, the airport up there. They pick me up and they head for the freeway fast, and they're gunning it down Interstate 5 to Olympia. It's like a 45-minute drive, and they pull off the freeway. They were clearly in a hurry for some sort of lunchtime event that they had arranged, And I'm picturing, these two guys and maybe a couple of their friends with, homemade sandwiches or whatever. So they roar into a college parking lot, hustle me out of the car into a building. Did I see somebody else wandering around with a mic maybe that they wanted to switch out for me? Because this gets so active, I'll have to, abandon the mic. Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh my gosh, I'm no longer tethered. So exciting. They hustle me into a building. I walk through this door, and there's a poster on the wall over here. I look, and it's big. It's like that big, and it's my face, right? And that's kind of disturbing when you walk into a building and go, wow, But there was even more disturbing about it. There were flames under my face. And the theme of the event was "Come Barbecue the Christian." See, these guys were marketing majors in the business school, and they thought this would be a great way to turn out a crowd. And the event had a whole barbecue theme. When I saw the poster, somebody walked by with a wheelbarrow covered in foil, and you could smell the barbecued chicken wings in the barrel. He's walking by, and he turns a corner, and people are like following. They're coming out of their office, following the scent, I walk around the corner and following my host and into this lecture hall, and it's standing room only. There are undergrads and graduate students and janitors and people's moms, and it was just jammed with people. And so this has been advertised all over campus. Basically, come get free barbecued wings from the best barbecue place in town. And everybody knew this place. Everybody wanted the wings, And in order to earn the wings, though, they had to listen to me, I guess. So I walk in there, and this is all catching me by surprise. I'm expecting, 5 chairs in a circle. So walk in, and these guys really hadn't thought through the whole thing all that well. They walk in, and they kind of go up to the crowd and say, okay, here's how it works. You ask questions of this guy for an hour, and then you get wings. That was it, barbecue the Christian with your questions, So I'm like, all right, I'm up for this. So I gave a quick, just kind of off-the-cuff opening talk of about 2 minutes and said, all right, let's hear your questions. I got to tell you, I've been doing this a while. Some of my friends in here have been doing it a while too, and the questions have changed over time. They've changed. They've gotten stupider. It used to be that the atheists and skeptics had some pretty good arguments, but now, honestly, they're just lame-brained. I'm not kidding. It was as if everybody in that lecture hall had gotten all of their theological knowledge from the Da Vinci Code. I'm like, every time I hear a question, I go, God, I'll bet you that's the Da Vinci Code. That's a sad state of affairs when some of our best and brightest in the colleges are basically learning all of their theology and religious studies from a novel written by kind of a kook. Not a bad story, but kooky religious stuff. So that was a bit terrifying, really. In fact, the questions were so bad I had to help them ask better questions. One guy asked the question, and I go, that'd be a lot harder for me if you were to formulate it this way. And I hand it back to him, and then he asks me that question. I go, oh, that's a hard one. Let me think about that. Even stranger was that after about a half hour of this, the questions just dried up. They're staring at me, and I'm staring back at them. I mean, this is a college, for goodness sakes. This is your chance to ask some academic fellow of a different persuasion all kinds of questions about the soul and God and aliens and, all kinds of stuff. Bible questions, you name it. And they're just like, Oh, that was a little disturbing. And so I'm staring at them, and they're staring back at me. And I'm not letting them off, because you'd have to ask the questions in order to earn the wings. And so I'm just staring at them, I am scanning the audience kind of like RoboCop, looking for motion. Everybody's going, ooh. And I did see a guy. He's got his hand going up out there. And, actually, first his neighbor was nudging him. He's like, I could see what he was saying just by looking at his mouth. It's like, ask the question. And the guy's going, okay. So he looks around and he sheepishly raises his hand. And I go, you. And he goes, yeah. Well, so do you believe in baptism? That was a strange question for that forum, And I said, sir, not only do I believe in it, I've seen it done. There's this pause. And then all of a sudden, the whole place just starts cracking up, And I was so happy about that, because it was as if the shields were coming down at that point, Everyone's just kind of taking a breath and sitting back a little bit, And I was really happy about that, because it was just a big game of gotcha up to that point, It's let's barbecue the Christian, let's make him look stupid. It was all just an adversarial thing. But once they started laughing and the shields went down, they actually started asking questions that you could tell were really on their mind. Like, so you're really a Christian and an academic? How does that work? I mean, really, they were very curious about that. They didn't think that was possible. And did you grow up in a Christian family? Maybe you were dropped on your head as a child. Help us understand your journey, I wish that had gone along. That part had gone longer, because I got a chance to actually tell them, about how Jesus transformed me and all this kind of cool stuff. And I could tell some people were intrigued. I don't think I made any converts that day, but the hour was up, and they finally released them for the wings, And they were pretty sanctimonious during this Q&A. A lot of them, rah, 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 rah. And but you should have seen them during the journey to the wing table. Oh my gosh, they're leaping out of their chairs, and they're rushing over, and they're knocking down people in walkers, and and clearly there were a lot of people in this audience that were architecture majors and structural engineering majors. Now, the reason I know this is because they gave everybody little plates. But they were able to build towers of wings with flying buttresses for support, drawbridges, and the whole thing, turrets, with cannons. Well, not quite that bad, but it was amazing. I remember that's going to fall, So they're over there getting their wings. Let me just tell you the really weird ending of this whole thing. So I'm talking to somebody who's in a front row chair right here. I'm actually leaning on a little stage like this, talking. And I've learned to use my peripheral vision on college campuses, by the way, because you never know what's coming at you. So I'm talking here, and I see some action at the wing table, and it's coming around the bend. And it's a woman. She's got a big plate of wings, and she's eating one. She's got a little schmutz on her face here, and she's coming at me. And she leans over. I'm still talking to the person down there. She leans over and just goes, hey, hey. And I look up, and there she is, like right there, like, a little personal space invasion. Like, yeah, yes, ma'am, what can I do for you? She's like, all right, here's my thing. There aren't enough women in the Bible. Like I'm in charge of that, So I'm thinking, this is so weird that she's clearly a plant from the drama department sent in to torment me, some practical joke. So I'm like, oh yeah, I totally know what you mean. And she's like, yeah? I go, yeah. Like, instead of the 3 wise men, should have been the 3 wise women. And she's going, yeah. So I go, that makes a lot more sense. Because if they were 3 wise women, they would have arrived on time. Because women ask for directions, and she's still eating, going, I said, and they would have gotten there early. They would have helped clean the stable and deliver the baby, and they would have brought practical gifts like a pacifier, a baby blanket, a casserole, And she goes, yeah, you get it. She walks away. So what's the point of all this? Here's the point. What in the world are we afraid of? That was the best they could do at a major college campus in the state of Washington, in like one of the strongest secular enclaves you could possibly imagine. My goodness, what you are learning here is put you so high above the fray in terms of knowledge of the big issues of life. Who you are, where you were, where you are now, where you're going, who is God, what's a soul, what's wrong with my relationship with God, how do I make it right, how do I reconnect with God. All those questions that are so deeply meaningful, you are going to have such a wonderful handle on. You got to practice talking about it. Because I can't tell you, you're going to become almost instantaneously, you will become what I call the water cooler guru of your workplace. You'll become the water cooler guru. I made up this term because I got all these reports from our own students. And not even our MA students in apologetics, but people who just done our certificate program. They go out and they learn all this great stuff, and then they go to work. And they end up being the person in the office who has the most interesting things to say about anything that hits the news. And especially the crazy stuff like, cloning and aliens on Mars and, all that kind of stuff. And so when it comes break time or lunchtime, people want to know what they think about it. And guess what else? The moment the secular person's kid is in rebellion and they're just, at wit's end, they also go to the Christian person who seems to have some pretty good answers about a lot of things when they're in a bit of a crisis, and it's really a wonderful moment to hit them with the gospel and minister to them. So I just hope you understand what you're getting. Dig deep. I know you're not going to catch it all the first time, but just start to learn this and start to practice talking about it, because it's the bomb. If you care about people, you want to see them come to the Lord, you're devoted to the Lord, and you have these kinds of answers, you're pretty good at articulating the gospel and answering some of the tough questions, it's the bomb. And we just don't do it enough. And this is very rare, folks. My colleagues and I at Biola, we're out almost every weekend in some church doing an apologetics conference. And you would think, wow, well, we must really be on a roll. But we have just so barely scratched the surface. So many churches don't even know what this is, or that Christianity is indeed intellectually defensible. Well, one thing that we need to defend in Christianity is a notion that's near and dear to my heart. And it's a very simple idea, though. Okay, in case you think you're going to get, some sort of weird, dissertation tonight on medieval Buddhist philosophy about, nothingness, I'm not going to go there. This is a very simple idea. When I did religious studies at the University of California in Santa Barbara, one thing I ended up learning about religions is most religion that you're going to bump into is folk religion. Even among Christians, It's folk religion, you know. So I was a little bit disappointed in that when I went to, grad school in religious studies. I got a chance to learn all this deep, interesting philosophy about religion and so on, and its history and doctrine and rituals and all this. It turns out most people don't really get into much of that. They simply, like if you're in Southern California and go into a donut shop, it's probably owned by a Vietnamese family, and you go in, there's a little statue of the Buddha, and they have a little bit of incense burning there, or maybe there's a piece of fruit there. That's it. It's mainly just to help their day along. Hopefully they're going to have a better day because they did that. I can't really get them to talk about Nisva Bhava or Nagarjuna's thought or anything else. They've never even heard of these people. They just want their day to go better. And almost everybody you bump into is going to have kind of that folk religion attitude, or maybe even a folk skepticism. They might think that Christianity really is just one religion among many. And the most helpful thing at that point is simply to offer up some ideas that show that Christianity is actually set apart in rather dramatic fashion from the other great world religious traditions. So I just want to help you with a few of those. I have found these to be incredibly helpful. So this is a very practical talk in that respect. I'll give you 5 things that really set Christianity apart from the pack. Well, like I said, I did my doctoral work in religious studies at the University of California in Santa Barbara. That was great fun. Here I was I could tell stories all night about that experience, because here I was a Bible-reading, Jesus-loving Christian going into really some of the most hostile territory you can possibly imagine. And it was a blast. I loved every second of it. And the Lord's hand was on me the whole way. I ended up winning more scholarship money as a grad student than I think anybody in the campus history. I mean, I was getting these giant checks every day. I think it was just the Lord saying, I'm really happy you took this risk. Here's some more money, Greg. Good for you. You're not supposed to get rich when you're a grad student. I didn't quite go that far, but it felt like it, being a grad student. Those stories for another time. But I had this marvelous opportunity to study Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism and Native American traditions and Mormonism and all those kinds of things from people who were great scholars in these movements and people who were devotees on the ground. And so I got a chance to compare Christianity with these other movements on a regular basis. And here's my conclusion of the whole thing, so you don't have to go off to hostile religious studies grad programs. But I hope some of you do. But in case you don't, here's the final conclusion. Here it is, boiling it all down. Ready? Christianity's weird. There, it's been said. Christianity is weird. It's bizarre. I mean, if there's a box called religion, right? Here it is. Here's the box called religion, and you try to drop Christianity into it. It doesn't go in the box. You can push it a little bit. You can saw some pieces off and push some more. It won't go in the box. It's like a cat. You ever tried to put a cat in a small box? Here, kitty. It's hard to get the cat in the box. Christianity's like that. It doesn't go into the religion box. It really doesn't fit the category very well at all. If you mention the word religion to your average person, they think Christianity. I don't. And what they're thinking about religion, I don't think Christianity fits that very well at all. And I want to give you some features of Christianity that really don't fit that category very well. And the one I like the most, the one that really stands out for me, the one that captured my imagination in grad school first, was this idea that Christianity is testable, that it's testable. And by testable, I mean that you can offer evidence for it, you can offer evidence against it, and the evidence actually means something. In other words, you can actually make decisions about whether to be a follower of Jesus Christ due to the evidence in the case and by investigating it. Now you're thinking, well, don't other religions open the door to that? Well, no, not really. I mean, some religions are right up front about this, like Zen Buddhism, for goodness sakes. A Zen Buddhist could really care less at the end of the day whether the Buddha existed or not, or whether the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths of the Eightfold Path in his sermon at the Deer Park in Benares. It doesn't matter to the Zen Buddhist. What matters to the Zen Buddhist is he or she sensing that he or she is moving closer to enlightenment on an inward basis. Right? That's what's really meaningful to the Zen Buddhist. It's about what's going on inside the Zen Buddhist. Some religions sound like they're testable, but when you poke and prod a little bit, ask some questions, it turns out they're really not. Mormonism is a prime example of this. I don't know if you get a chance to have Mormon missionaries come to your door here in South Louisiana, but they're pretty hot and heavy around my neck of the woods in California. And when the missionaries come to your door, let's say they are coming to your door and you have studied up on it, right? You've read the Book of Mormon, you've read the pros and cons, and so you're ready to deal with the Mormon missionaries when they come to your door. So here they are. You open the door, and there's a couple of bicycles parked in your flower bed, and a couple of fellows with short-sleeved white shirts and black name badges standing in front of you, Elder so-and-so and Elder such-and-such. And now you are kind, and you want to let them just have their say. And so they give you a rendition of, sort of the Mormon story. Like there was this prophet Joseph Smith who he encountered an angel, and this angel told him about gold plates up in a local hill, and he went up and finally was released to dig them up, and he brings them down, and by the gift and power of God, he's able to translate these ancient languages that nobody could translate into modern English, and he produces the Book of Mormon, and the Book of Mormon talks about the ancient peoples of the Western Hemisphere and all their intrigue and tumult, and then maybe even a visit by Jesus himself to the Western Hemisphere and so on. So they give you the whole thing and you listen patiently. And when they're done, you start to ask a couple of questions, right? Some good pointed questions about the story that they just told, because you've studied up on this. And what happens at that point? By the way, it happens to missionaries at the door, happens with local bishops, happens with stake presidents, happens with all the general authorities, happens with the professors of religious education at Brigham Young University, and even the apostles and first presidency of the church. I've had this happen at every level in the Mormon church, and up to the level of the apostles, where you ask some hard questions and they go like this: well, look, you're asking some really good questions, and I don't really know what to say about that, but you have to understand something, Craig. I've had a feeling about this. I've had what they classically call the burning of the bosom. You see how it sounded like it was testable, but then when you started asking some hard questions, it all really became about what's going on inside of them. And I don't want to diss that too much, because I'm really a big fan of inner religious experience, man. Bring me more, Lord. I'll take as much as you have for me. But here's the unique thing about Christianity: it doesn't end there. Right? It doesn't end there. In fact, let me read to you what I would consider to be one of the strangest passages in all of religious literature. You're not going to find something like this in the Bhagavad Gita or the Buddhist Tripitaka or the Quran or the Book of Mormon. This comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Check this out. You've probably read this before, but hear it in this particular vein, because it's kind of a remarkable passage. Here's what Paul writes. But if it is preached that Christ has been raised from the dead, how can some of you say that there is no resurrection of the dead? If there is no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless. And so is your faith. Really? He continues, more than that, we are then found to be false witnesses about God, for we have testified about God that he raised Christ from the dead. But he did not raise him if in fact the dead are not raised. For if the dead are not raised, then Christ has not been raised either. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile, empty, worthless, of no account would be synonyms. And you're still in your sins. Then those also who have fallen asleep in Christ are lost. If only for this life we have hope in Christ, we are of all people most to be pitied. Now, why would I call that one of the strangest passages in all of religious literature? Was he mad What was he thinking? This is no way to start a religion, folks. All right? I actually thought a lot about this in boring grad school seminars. How would I start my own religion? Guess what? I wouldn't do it this way, because he's basically saying, he's talking about this miraculous event that people knew about and could actually investigate. That is a terrible way to start a religion. Because somebody might actually investigate it, find out this is a bunch of hooey, and pull the plug on the whole operation. Bad idea. If you want to start your own religion, do it more like Scientology or something, where you come up with a bunch of crazy ideas and you kind of keep them inside of you and you dole them out. Never something that can actually be tested. It's always got a spiritual veneer to it. So you're doling it out for large sums of money. That's how you start a good, viable new religion. But if you're talking about, oh yeah, he came back from the dead, you got to be careful with that, because people can then check it out. You see, Christianity is testable. You can actually check it out. And God likes it that way. It makes us feel a little insecure at times, but overall it works really well. Christianity is testable. And that's something, in my view, that sets Christianity in rather dramatic fashion apart from the pack of the other great world religious traditions. I want to give you some other features, but let me do this by engaging you with a story. It's a story where I first learned about these things, and really this is the story that kind of inspired my novel, Five Sacred Crossings. This isn't the story of my novel, but it's something that inspired it for sure. I get a call in my office at Biola. It was a weird call. It's from a local community college, and in fact, the community college had a semester-long world religion survey course, and they are getting near the end of the term. And towards the end of the term, they like to bring in representatives of various religious traditions to engage the students directly. Now that they've learned about the traditions, let's bring in somebody and they can talk with the person. So this is all my supposition and imagining right now. So I'm imagining this professor of this world religions class. He's got his TAs, sitting around there going, well, we're getting towards the end of the term, and we need to bring in some representatives of various religions. Let's see, we got the Buddhist monk, we got the Catholic priest. We should really have a fundamentalist represented. And one of the grad students says, well, where do you find those? And the other teaching assistant says, well, I know a place, Biola University. I'll bet they have some, And so, to the phones. So they dial up Biola University. Now we're getting closer to reality. They call it Biola University. They get the university operator. I'm not sure exactly what they said, but I always imagine this. Hello, I'm looking for a fundamentalist, please. And the university operator goes, one moment. And it comes to my office, So I'm chatting with this guy on the phone, and I'm hearing what he's up to, and I'm going, this sounds great. He keeps saying, can you come represent fundamentalism? I'm like, do you really know what that is? And so I'm trying to explain it to him. He goes, do you want to do it or not? I'm like, well, okay, I'll do it. I can come give a lecture on, the modern, fundamentalist movement in America if you'd like. Whatever, but it's 8:30 next Wednesday. I'm thinking, 8:30? Nobody's going to be there. These are community college students. This is an elective class, for goodness sakes. They're not going to be there at 8:30 in the morning. Turns out I was wrong. This is a very popular class. Turns out students in Southern California at a community college, they love a world religion survey because so many of them are actually kind of spiritually hungry and they're looking for something. And so they use a world religion survey class to take some of these religions out for a little test drive, How does Buddhism handle in the corners, How does Islam accelerate, So I get there at 8:30 thinking nobody's going to be there, but I walk into this lecture hall and it's starting to fill up. And the students are walking and they are looking pretty bedraggled. They've got their gigantic cups of coffee, though they're shuffling in and they're sitting down. I can tell this is going to be a bit of a challenge. A teaching assistant comes up and greets me, and I said, hey, I'd like to meet the professor of the class. And I go, is he or she here? And he goes, he's here. I go, well, where is he? He goes, he's over there. This is kind of weird. So I look around this first row of desks and chairs, and at the very end was a man with his head down. And I go, oh, is he sick? And the guy goes, no. Well, I figured he was sick, so I wasn't going to go over there and shake his hand or anything. But I got the backstory later. Turns out, this guy, when he turns his class over to guest speakers towards the end of the term, he doesn't have anything to prep, and so he goes out chasing girls and drinking most of the night, comes in with hangovers, and he's just kind of a mess. So he just kind of sleeps it off in the corner was the backstory. So I didn't know that at the time, but I'm like, I'll just let him sleep it off, whatever he's got over there. And so the class got started. They introduced me. And, oh, by the way, we academics, we like our introductions, PhD in this and author of that and award winner of this and that. But I remember the introduction I got. I don't actually remember the words. I remember how it felt. It felt like the guy said, here is Craig Hazen. He's some sort of fundamentalist. His education probably consisted of memorizing Bible verses at Bill's Bible College and Feedlot. That's how it felt. So I just remember walking up to the little lectern there and seeing this guy over here with his head down, seeing the teaching assistant sit down, with kind of a smug look on his face. And I'm thinking, I have free reign here. I mean, those are the words I remember saying to myself. I have free reign. So I said, hey, students, glad to be here. And my assignment this morning is to actually give you a bit of a talk on the American fundamentalist movement. I know something about that. I'd be happy to do that. But I got to tell you, on the way down here, I was thinking about something else. Because I know a lot of you are taking this course just to kind of check out the various religions, which one might really connect with you. And I love that kind of thing. I like helping people sort through all their religious options, and maybe finding the one that's going to be just right. And I know that you're here and you're studying all kinds of thoughtful topics like astronomy and art history and sociology and organic chemistry and everything. So how would a person like you, a thoughtful person who's engaging their minds in all these important academic subjects, engage your mind in sorting through the various religious options? How would a thoughtful person like you go about a religious quest? That's just something I was thinking about. Of course, they didn't want to hear some lecture on fundamentalism, and a Starbucks at the same time had just kicked in. They're like, what did he say? Oh, we should do that. Let's do the journey thing you're talking about, I'm like, all right then. Still out. We're good to go. All right then. Now, problem is I hadn't prepped anything on this. I'm kind of making it up as I go right now. So then, all right. If you're a thoughtful person and you're on some sort of religious quest, in my view, from my studies and my thinking, it makes perfect sense that you would start that quest with Christianity. Some of you look like you were in that class. I mean, the looks on your face. So they're kind of like, and then I met a guy. Right? This guy who was sitting dead center in the back of the lecture hall in the last row, and he's kind of leaning back a little bit. He had long stringy blonde hair and a t-shirt on, and he had a skateboard he was holding, He was like some local surfer guy. And turns out this guy was way smarter than he looked, And he's sitting next to two other guys with skateboards who had long stringy hair of some sort, and those guys turned out not to be any smarter than they looked. But the guy in the middle, in fact, I was so intrigued by this character on that particular morning, I made him a character in my novel, Five Sacred Crossings. So, Darren, if you read the novel, it's Darren is this guy. So he just kind of raises his hand in a funny way. He's like, so I go, yeah? He goes, I thought you weren't going to give us a lecture on fundamentalism, but the first thing you say is you got to start with my religion because it's best. What's that about? I go, well, okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm glad we're thinking this through. We want to think through our options and our journey that we're taking. So, well, let me do this. Let me give you 5 reasons why. 5 reasons why a thoughtful person on a religious quest would obviously start that quest with Christianity. Now, I had no idea if I had 5. I knew I had 2. Come on, Jesus. Give me some. But I thought once I got on a roll, I might come up with something else. But I don't know why I said 5. I've always been obsessed with it's 5 reasons, 5 sacred crossings. Those are actually related. So here, 5. I'll go, okay, the first reason, I told him, the first reason that a thoughtful person on a religious quest would obviously start that quest with Christianity is that with Christianity, you get something that's testable. Christianity is testable. So that'd be fill-in number 1 if you haven't filled that in already. And then I gave them the basic case that I've already given you about that. Like I read to them that passage in 1 Corinthians and so on. I made one additional point to them. I said, you see how practical this testability notion is? Because I don't know how long it's going to take you to investigate to find out whether Jesus came back from the dead a couple thousand years ago. But it is, in principle, testable and investigatable. But it might take you 7 hours, 7 days, 7 weeks, maybe 70 years to do the investigation. But it is, in principle, doable. All right? I go, compare that with, say, Buddhism. How long does it take to figure out the basic truth of Buddhism, to find out whether it truly is a journey of liberation? And I told him, I asked a senior Mahayana teacher one time, how many trips on the wheel of samsara, right? The birth, death, and rebirth. How many times do you go through that before you're finally thrown off into nirvana, liberation? And he goes, we don't know for sure, but we always guess it'd be something like 1 times 10 to the 60th power of lifetimes. Now, maybe some of you are a little rusty on your scientific notation, but that's a 1 with 60 zeros attached to it. That's how many lifetimes you go through, on average, to get thrown off into nirvana. Now, we won't get into the argument as whether it's you that gets thrown off into nirvana or what it is, because there really is no you in Buddhism, but that's a whole different talk. Anyway, I told the students, look, you can see why I would recommend starting with Christianity, because if you investigate it, you discover the evidence just doesn't add up. Then you can set it aside and move on to something else in a finite amount of time. That actually made a lot of sense. And like, all right, what else you got? Okay, all right. Second reason, a thoughtful person on a religious quest would obviously start that quest with Christianity. And it is, in Christianity, salvation is a free gift from God. In Christianity, salvation is a free gift from God. He just gives it to you. By the way, brothers and sisters in Christ, we don't make a big enough deal about this because it shocks people every time they hear it. What are you talking about? It is a free gift from God. There's no crawling over jagged rocks for miles to lay some offering in some temple. No sitting in arthritis-producing lotus positions, for hours on end in hope of moving inwardly toward enlightenment. Nothing like that. He just gives it to you. It's astonishing. And these students really caught on to that. They were college students, for goodness sake. They understood the concept of free, They always, they're either looking for a free sandwich or a free haircut or a free music download, but they understood the concept of free. And so I just explained some of this to them. And I read to them that famous passage in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It's the gift of God, not the result of works, that no one should boast. By the way, Lee Strobel wrote a book last year called The Case for Grace. By the way, you probably are familiar with the case for Christ, the case for faith, the case for the Creator and all that. This was the case for grace. And it's really a remarkable book. He uses his wonderful journalistic powers to interview these amazing transformations in people. I like to mention it because I'm featured in chapter 4. It's really not about my transformation. I'm the guy who actually gives a little bit of perspective on if there is a real concept of grace that plays out in other world religions, or is Christianity unique? Guess what, folks? Christianity is unique. There's nothing like it. The idea of salvation by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone, is something you're not going to find. The way it's presented in the New Testament by Jesus himself and the apostles, you're simply not going to find in any religion on the planet today or through human history. It's just remarkable. And we need to make more of that. So, second reason a thoughtful person on a religious quest would start their quest with Christianity is that salvation is a free gift from God. The third reason, now this is where I was getting dicey. I said, come on, Lord, give me something. The third reason that a thoughtful person on a religious quest would obviously start that quest with Christianity is that in Christianity, you get an amazing worldview fit. You get an amazing worldview fit. What I mean by that is Christianity paints a picture of the world that matches the way the world really is. Christianity paints a picture of the world that matches the way the world really is. Of course, I was on point number 3 or something, and that's pretty good. And, watching the students are like, yeah. And then skateboard guy, hand up. And he was my foil for the whole morning. And he's going, excuse me. He goes, it sounds like now you're just saying stuff. And he was kind of right, because basically that's a huge comment, isn't it? I mean, my religion is so cool. In fact, this is how he described it. My religion is so cool that it basically matches everything. What's that about? I mean, how are you going to demonstrate that was his issue? And I go, wow, that's a very good point, because I run a master's degree in Christian apologetics where we study this stuff across the board, and it feels like we barely scratched the surface on how the Christian worldview kind of lines up with the way the world really is. But I said, let me give you one example that I think is very important and usually is the thing that either makes or breaks a worldview. And I said, it's the problem of evil, pain, and suffering in the world. What does Christianity have to say about evil, pain, and suffering? And what do the Eastern religions have to say about evil, pain, and suffering? And I said, in Eastern religions, there's one primary way of dealing with the problem of evil, pain, and suffering. There's all kinds of nuances, and I won't get into, slicing and dicing through all the traditions and the eras of doctrine and so on. But by and large, the way evil, pain, and suffering are dealt with in Eastern religious traditions is you rename them. You call them Maya, a Sanskrit term for illusion. And then you simply work hard to find a way to push it off the table, right? You just work very hard through the meditative disciplines and through interesting, Buddhist dialogues and so on to come to the deepest realization, to assimilate it deeply that evil, pain, and suffering are actually illusory. And if you can come to that conclusion, evil, pain, and suffering will just kind of evaporate from your life. Right? So I asked the students, do you think that really captures it? Is that a view of the world that's really viable? Let me give you kind of a counterexample to that. Let's say the door opens in the back of the lecture hall, and in walks an elderly woman. She's got a shock of gray hair, and she's got a cane and a limp, and she walks down the steps of the lecture hall, and she sits right here in front. Well, we don't get classroom invasions by elderly women very often, so we pause for a moment and say, Madam, what's your story? And she doesn't hesitate for a second. She gets up from her seat, she turns to the class, and in a thick Polish accent, she starts telling her story, especially as a young girl in Poland during the Nazi invasion and occupation, that her primarily Jewish village one day roll the German troops and start gathering people up. They had them pack little suitcases like they were actually going on a trip. They were going on no trip. In fact, they took those suitcases and threw them in one boxcar and started stuffing the people into another. And they would stuff the people in so tight that if they were to fall asleep or even die en route to the camp of concentration, they wouldn't even hit the floor. You can imagine what misery this was during the sweltering summer months. So this train takes off for some death camp somewhere, some camp of concentration. It pulls up, they open the doors, they're throwing dead bodies off, and people are just getting out. They're barely alive, some of them. And most of them are herded into a big compound. In the back of the compound, you could actually see smokestacks churning day and night. Some of the lucky ones were ushered over into a smaller compound. These were people who were going to be working. We know what was going to happen to the rest of them. So they're gathered together. The little girl, she's fortunate enough to just be trundled along into the work camp with some of the other passengers. And there she works for a couple of weeks. She doesn't see her family. Nobody from her village got into the work gig. But after a couple of weeks, she is nearly dead. She's almost starved to death. She's wearing rags. And fortunately for her, the Red Army comes in and liberates the camp. And here she stands all alone, nearly starved to death, wearing rags. Nobody from her family, nobody from her village left. Class, what are you going to say to her? Are you going to say to her, cheer up, lady. Turn that frown upside down. Just think happy thoughts, and the world will be your oyster. Is that what you're going to say to her? You go, I don't think so. Guess why? Because she really suffered, and we know that. There's just no brushing that off the table. It would be a tremendous insult and even cause more pain and suffering to tell her it was some sort of illusion. It was real. Christianity doesn't call evil, pain, and suffering an illusion and attempt to brush it off the table. Rather, we think it's real. And so, knowing that it's real, we follow the example of our Lord and Savior and His commands to take care of the people in pain and suffering. Our great calling is to leap down into the trenches when people are suffering and bear them up the best we can in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. And it doesn't end there. We worship a God who has promised one day to wipe away every tear and to correct every moment of injustice. And He will. We don't have the answer to every individual moment of pain and suffering that people experience, but we do know a God who one day will deal with it. He's aware of it, and He's going to take care of it. That's how you deal with evil, pain, and suffering. That's painting a picture of the world that matches the way the world really is. Eastern traditions generally don't paint a picture, especially in terms of evil, pain, and suffering, with regard to the way the world really is. The fourth reason that a thoughtful person on a religious quest would obviously start that quest with Christianity is that you get to live a non-compartmentalized life. You get to live a non-compartmentalized life. Put differently, you get to live a holistic life. I remember thinking up this particular issue when I was looking at the students in the class at the community college that morning, because there were a lot of Asian students. And in Asian religions, generally, the trump card is that we are more holistic. We are always looking for a holistic picture of the world. But in my study of Asian religions, it turned out it was nothing of the sort. In fact, it was one of the most bifurcating things I'd ever seen. There are huge gulfs, huge compartments in Asian life and religion. And this is a bit of a technical point, but I'll try to just boil it down and make it quick. But in Asian religions, you have your religious life. And in your religious life, guess what? Rationality is actually a bit of a problem. You're really not supposed to think your way to God or spiritual growth, right? In fact, any kind of rational activity is generally an impediment or a blockage. And so you do your best to actually eliminate rationality in your religious life. Right? In fact, in your religious life, A can equal non-A all day long. And that's okay. However, when a person who is a proponent of an Asian tradition goes home to his or her family or attempts to balance his or her checkbook or do an experiment in a laboratory or something, guess what? A cannot equal non-A ever, or they get into some serious trouble. They have problems balancing their checkbook and doing their taxes and even crossing the street. Is the truck there or is the truck not there? You know, so you have to engage your mind constantly in a logical, rational way. So in Asian religions, in the religious sphere, rationality does not apply. But over here in the everyday sphere, rationality applies constantly. And these are two separate spheres that the person lives in. In my view, Christianity brings those two spheres together. There's no difference in the way we apply rationality in the spiritual or in the everyday. We actually are encouraged to passionately follow God with all our mind, to think about Him, to to come and give our strong arguments, as Isaiah says. Or come, let us reason together. We worship Jesus, the Logos, or the reason of God. These things come together. We use rationality in our everyday life to successfully cross streets, balance our checkbooks, and pay our taxes. And we also use rationality to grow closer to God. I think you may have experienced a little bit about that today. So, you get to live a non-compartmentalized life. Who would have thought that Christianity might actually be more holistic than Eastern religions? But it turns out that is the case, especially in terms of rationality. The fifth and final reason that a thoughtful person on a religious quest would obviously start that quest with Christianity is, let me give the setup for this. So I didn't know how long this class was supposed to go at the community college, and I could tell from the posture of the students that it was supposed to be done, because I'm at this last point, which I think is very important. They're pulling up their backpacks and they're putting books in. There's a class wanting to come in too. There's a door over here in the lecture hall, and there's a little window in it. There's a fellow looking through, and he's got glasses down his nose, and he's tapping on his watch over there, and there's students bobbing behind him like, when do we get in? And our professor is still asleep down here, so I'm not getting any direction from him. So I'm just rolling on. I see the students antsy, and I go, okay, everybody hang in there. I have one last point I want to make. The fifth and final reason that a thoughtful person on a religious quest would obviously start that quest with Christianity is that Christianity has Jesus at the center. So they're kind of quiet like that. They're really not paying attention much. They continue to pack their backpacks. And a skateboard guy, he doesn't even raise his hand, he just shouts it out. He goes, oh my gosh, can you imagine what he just did? This was a lecture on fundamentalism after all. He just waited till the last second of class to play the big Jesus card. Oh, we should have seen this coming, And everybody had stood up like that, and they're starting to walk out of the room. Wait! Everybody, hang in there 1 second. What in the world have you people been learning in this class? He's still down. What in the world have you been learning in this class? Don't you know that Jesus is the universal religious figure? Everybody wants a piece of Jesus. Everybody wants to take him, fix him up a little bit, and plunk him down near the center of their religion. It makes perfect sense if you're a thoughtful person on a religious quest that you would want to start with that particular religion that has this universal religious figure near the center. Take Buddhism, for example. In Buddhism, in some forms of Buddhism, Jesus emerges as a Buddha himself. He might very well be a reincarnation of the Buddha. If they don't go that far, in the Mahayana tradition, they would certainly consider him some sort of bodhisattva, somebody who brings people up to the pinnacle of enlightenment and so on, and then steps back for noble purposes to help others along. In Hinduism, some people think Jesus might very well be an avatar, an incarnation of the Hindu deity, Vishnu. Might be an avatar of Vishnu. If they don't go that far, a person like Gandhi would say that Jesus was clearly one of the greatest religious teachers of all time. Islam, for goodness sakes. In Islam, Jesus emerges as a figure perhaps greater than Muhammad himself. I don't know how you keep score on this particular one, but it's like Muhammad's a prophet. We know that for sure from Islamic tradition, right? Well, so is Jesus. But Jesus was also born of a virgin, was a legitimate miracle worker, and, will stand with all at the scales of justice at the end of time. Many more things. Maybe it's something like, Muhammad 1, Jesus 4. I'm not sure of the score, but the point is, he's a very important figure in Islam. Everybody wants a piece of Jesus. So if you're a thoughtful person on a religious quest, it makes perfect sense to start with the religion that has had him firmly planted at the center from the very beginning. I remember getting all that out. I scooped up my stuff off the lectern and I just walked out. There was a door over here, and I just kept walking until I got to some picnic tables, and I just dropped my stuff. Took a deep breath and saw this line of students coming out the same door, which they don't normally use, I don't think. And they're starting to encircle me. Fortunately, they were not throwing sharp objects. They simply wanted to ask sharp questions, I think. And we hadn't had much time for Q&A. Oh, my goodness, it was like a rest of the day seminar. I just really got their juices flowing. They wanted to argue with me and agree with me on some points. But I remember it must have been like 10 or 10:30. We were eating pastries and drinking coffee. It wasn't long before we were eating sandwiches at lunchtime. And then afternoon coffee again. You know, I don't think we made it quite to dinner, but a whole gaggle of them just kept going at it and really enjoying it. And you could tell there was a pretty deep hunger to have legitimate discussions on these kinds of issues. And I think it really helped that my 5 points weren't, here are 5 reasons why Christianity is true and you're an idiot for not being a Christian. Rather, it was 5 reasons that a thoughtful person would start their quest with Christianity. But under that banner, I got to bring in all kinds of wonderful evidence that I'm very passionate about with regard to Christianity. So that got my creative juices flowing. That ended up leading to a novel which captures all 5 of those points. I will just urgently stop there, put on the brake, and do we have Q&A or do we have any time? Okay.
If you have a question, we have time for a question or two.
Within the realm of Christendom, just nominal Christendom, what is the most insidious folk doctrine that you've come across?
Say that one more time. I'm a little hard of hearing, so I have to hear it twice.
Within the realm of Christendom, like nominal Christians, what is the most insidious folk doctrine that you have come across?
Oh, folk doctrine?
Yes.
Wow. Protestants have theirs, and when I think of folk religion with regard to Christianity, often I'm thinking of a village in Italy. You know, it's had Catholicism for generations. When you go in there, you go, here is a folk religion. Now, some of them are very pious and pray and so on, but some just do the rituals to make their day go better. I would say I would have to say the faith teaching movement in Protestant Christianity could be one of the biggest folk religions. There are whole doctrines that are now carried forth in that movement that would barely be recognized by traditional Christianity.
Thank you.
Sure.
You were talking about the uniqueness of salvation being through grace. How would you deal with religions that have a view of universalism or just the arbitrariness of salvation? God just chooses. I'm thinking more Islam in that sense, more of an arbitrary. How would you deal with those? Because it's not a free gift, but it isn't necessarily something you're doing because it's either arbitrary or it's universal.
Yeah, you know, in order to avoid these kinds of comparisons, what I do is I point not just to Ephesians chapter 2, but to Jesus and his parable of the prodigal son. There is a story that very carefully lays out how God actually activates and operates in grace. And if you can find anything that kind of matches up with that, universalism simply doesn't. Anything in Islam doesn't. You know, so any concept that you might think would parallel the Christian concept of grace, you use the parable of the prodigal son as your final measure. Is it really coming up to that par? Because that's the thing that really pushes it over the top for me. There are notions of grace in other religions. There's no doubt about that. In fact, even in Eastern religions, there's a school of Hinduism called the Cat School. It's a bhakti form of Hinduism, devotional Hinduism, where their notion of grace is that a mother cat, will pick up a kitten by the head and carry it over there and drop it, you know, and that is supposed to illustrate the grace of God in moving a person towards enlightenment. That's a pretty nominal concept of grace, you know. That doesn't match up even to the Ephesians chapter 2 test, but compare that to the prodigal son. That's really the ultimate measure of the grace of God and the unique grace of God offered in Christianity.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I have a question about your example that you used about the Jew in the Holocaust. Who who were the people that put that Jew in the concentration camp?
Who are the people that...
Put that Jew in the concentration camp.
Oh, who were the people who put the Jew in the concentration camp? I don't know, is this a trick question?
I mean, it was the Germans, and a lot of them were Christians. They had a Christian society. And so when you talk about your points that relate to, this is why Christianity is better, something that's better to start with than all other world religions, I think that the one that's separate is Judaism, because Judaism actually does have a lot of those same aspects of Christianity and tolerance, or grace,
well,
and caring about people.
Your point's well taken. My point for that whole illustration was simply to show that evil, pain, and suffering is real. You can't go through something like that and simply try to say it's illusory.
You're trying to show that Christians care about people, but Jews have a high value in caring about people as well, so that's a high tenet of Judaism, just like it is in Christianity.
In fact, I wasn't really trying to make that point, but I mean, I totally agree with you on that point. Yeah, thanks.
What would you say are a couple of the most informative books you've read on comparing world religions?
That's a hard question. There are very few books out there written by Christians. This is, by the way, if you want an area of study, there's still a huge vacuum in really thoughtful Christians who've done high-level work in various religions. And by high-level work, I mean actually learning the languages of these particular religions and becoming experts. There's a huge vacuum in that. We need better work. And there are open doors. I remember when I came out of grad school at UC Santa Barbara, Wheaton College had an opening in Eastern religions. Now, I wasn't an expert in Eastern religions, but I knew something about them. And so when I sent in a letter of interest, they got back to me like immediately, like, oh, when can you come? I'm like, hey, now, I'm really not all that qualified, but they were so desperate for somebody who knew anything about these religions that they were willing to take a schmuck like me, I say that to show there aren't very many good books, but I would recommend The Tapestry of Faith by Wynne Corduan. In fact, anything by Wynne Corduan, you're good to go. He's just a wonderful Christian expert in world religions. There are some others, but I have to be very careful about talking about secular books in the field. They usually do a pretty good job in most religions, but they really don't do a very good job in Christianity, as you might be surprised. So come up afterwards, and I'll probably be able to give you a few more titles. But anything by Wynne Corduan, who's probably spoken at this conference before.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Hazen. Did you guys have fun? I knew you would. Dr. Hazen will be back in the morning. He's doing the 10:30 session in the morning, and I think you're going to have a lot of fun there. We'll also have a session at 9 o'clock in the morning. Again, remember, if you haven't registered, you can do that in the cafeteria at 8:15 a.m. I know that Dr. Hazen is going to be down here with his swag and have a conversation with Dr. Hazen there if you'd like to. Let me close this in a word of prayer. Father, again, thank you for tonight. Thank you for the exclusivity of the gospel, the uniqueness of the gospel, and the uniqueness of the free grace that we have in Christ Jesus. And we just thank you for this word that we had, such an encouragement, and may it be a blessing to each of us in our service in the kingdom. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.